everybody, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Myah and this is Inspired by Myah. Okay guys, don't watch the tired face, the tired voice. I literally woke up like not even an hour ago. But in today's video I'm going to be making a customer's order. So I'm just going to run you through the steps of like the process it takes for me to complete an order. I've already kind of started, to be honest, because I've done making the pattern, I've sewn the sample and cut out the pieces, but maybe in like future videos I'll show that. But in today's video I just want to show you how like I assemble this particular garment and some tips and tricks to get like your sewing looking really neat and professional basically. This blouse that I'm making is actually on my Instagram already. I didn't make a video for it because it was just one of those things that I just sewed together. But if you're not following me already on Instagram at inspiredbymyah.uk, that's the blouse that I made. It has like a nice tie neck with some cuffs and like gathered caps on the sleeve and like a back hook. It's really cute and formal. So without further ado, I'm just going to show you the sample that I made and the pieces that you need. So here's the sample that I made. Oh, I got a mannequin guys, I'm so gassed, but here's the sample. Here's what the back looks like. So this is the yoke and then this is the back of it, which I've like gathered into the yoke. So the yoke's actually two pieces, but I'll go in and explain that a bit more when I show you the pattern. We've got like the tie neck situation going on and we've had a fitting and everything fits fine, to be honest. It's just that when I was making the pattern I forgot to add gathers into the sleeve, which I've done now. So that's going to be different. And then with the neck, see I made it so that the neck, like, I don't know how to explain it properly, but like the necktie is right at the end of both sides of the placket, so it doesn't leave much room for movement, if you get what I mean. So I'm gonna kind of separate the bow from about here and maybe drop the neckline a bit, just so that they have more like movability and don't feel so restricted in it. But other than that, everything's fine. I just took the hem up as well by 5 centimeters. But yeah, this is it. So I'm gonna show you the pattern pieces now. Whoa. So here's all my pattern pieces. This is the sleeve, the front of the blouse, the back, the yoke. This is a neck facing and the cuffs, and then this is the bow. So for the back of the blouse, it's a piece that's cut on the fold. So I placed it on my fabric, but then I placed it like 5 centimeters away from the folded edge, just so that when I open it up I get 10 centimeters added in, which I can gather into the yoke. For the yoke, again, it's cut on the fold, but I'll cut out 2 pieces because what we're going to do is trap it in this, or trap this in there essentially, so it's going to be seamed in, and then we'll get like a nice neat finish on the outside and inside. This is the front of the shirt and I've added the placket on, so I've added 6 centimeters to the center front, and that includes seam allowance. So my seam allowance is 1 centimeter, and then when you fold my placket down to its actual size, it's 2.5 centimeters. So that'll get folded in, and I also need to add interfacing now to that. Here's the sleeve. So as you can see, it's been separated, slashed and spread, so it's added more room up into the cap and down at the bottom. So that will get eased into the armhole seam and to the cuff. This is the cuff. It's just the wrist measurement, and then I think I made mine about 8 centimeters, I believe. So the cuff width is 8 centimeters, and then there's 1 centimeter all around the pattern. This is the neck facing. Now, when I was talking earlier about the necktie being a bit like claustrophobic around the neck, because I sewed it like right to the edge of the placket, I decided that to make it look neat on the inside, it would probably be best if I did it like a facing type of situation. Similar to the yoke actually, how you see me trap it in to the 2 pieces. So I'm just gonna trap the, which one's the front? I can't remember. Oh, this way. So essentially this neck facing will have the bow like trapped in here, then I'll put it on top and seam it together, but like I'd leave a gap where I want the bow to start hanging off. So like before I sewed it onto, the bow was all the way over here, but instead I'm just gonna leave the bow like attached from there. I hope that's making sense a little bit, but you'll see when I start to sew it. That's my idea. Hi guys, it's editing Myah here. So I just realised I'm talking about the facing, and the way how I'm explaining it, I wasn't able to do it that way, but you'll see how I end up sewing it up. But I just want to come with my solution, which I've just thought about now. So I'd still do the facing situation, but I would just extend it down the front of the shirt. So say this is the bottom of the shirt, I would make a facing that goes all the way up around the neck and back down. So that way I'm able to have a nice clean like placket area, but also the bow tie would be able to get trapped in, because the way how I did it, I have to do hand sewing, and ugh, I hate hand sewing. Yeah, if you're enjoying the video, please like, subscribe, comment, share the video. But let's get back into the tutorial. So I've got 4 pieces here for the necktie, and I'm just gonna seam them together at the center back, and then it's pretty simple to assemble that really. It's just getting the corners pointed and stuff really nicely, which makes all the difference. So anyways, I'm gonna start sewing now, but I'm gonna start sewing the yoke area. So I'm gonna gather up the top of the center back body piece and attach it inside the yoke. So I've got my machine set up now. For the needle, I just put in a, I don't know what it's called, but the numbers are 90/14 needle. I just find that this needle works well with the fabric that I'm using. For my foot, I've put on a walking foot, so it's not your normal foot. A walking foot will just like walk across the fabric and keep everything like even and together. It won't, like say you're doing a seam, the top fabric and the bottom fabric will stay at the same pace, whereas if you use like a normal foot, it kind of drags the fabric through and then they can like mismatch essentially. I've also got a magnetic seam guide on my sewing machine, and that's placed at 1 centimeter from the needle because that's the seam allowance that I'm using. That just helps to keep evenness around your garment, I guess. It's not essential, but it just helps. To be honest, I don't think I'm going to use mine because it's actually, because the walking foot is so big, it's kind of pushing it out of the way. So I'm just going to use the markings on my sewing machine. The other things I want to mention is the stitch settings. So I'm going to be using a straight stitch for the whole garment, I believe, and then my length is going to be in between 2 and 3. And then the width of my needle is at 0, and the tension is something that you're gonna have to play about with your garment. So obviously do a test run on a couple of pieces of, you know, that fabric, just so that you can figure out if you've got the correct needle tension, all of that. And then when you're happy, we can start, I guess. So to do my gathering stitch, I'm just gonna put my length of the stitch at 4, and then don't forget, we don't want to back stitch at the start of a gathering stitch because we're going to pull on it. When you're working with satin, you want to make sure that you're using sharp pins, just so that you don't get holes in your fabric and weird pulling, because then that ruins your fabric and that's the worst. So for the gathering stitch, I'm not going to do it at my seam allowance. I'm just going to do it at the about probably like 0.5 centimeters, so half of it. And if you do 1 stitch, you're not going to get very even gathers, so I recommend doing 2 stitches just so that you get that nice, it's like a more even full gather basically. So now I've got my 2 stitches which are ready to gather. So you either take the top 2 threads or the bottom 2 threads and just start to pull on them. But I'm just going to pull on it so that it matches the width of my yoke. So before I start putting the gathered edge into the yoke, I'm just going to iron it out just to get any creases out so that the fabric's as flat as possible. So I've ironed my pieces now, and I'm just going to match the gathered bit up to the yoke, and I actually need to take a bit of gathering out, so just going to pull on the ends. This fabric frays a lot as well, so you want to keep that in mind. Okay, that matches up perfectly now. So I'm just going to place the bottom of the yoke right sides facing up with the gathered side of the back piece right sides facing down, and then take the other yoke right sides facing down, and I'm just going to pin and stitch all along the bottom edge. This bit will definitely be a bit tricky because it's such a slippy fabric, but just take your time with it, I guess. Okay, I'm finally ready to start sewing now. That took so much longer than I thought because the fabric just kept slipping and everything, but I feel like it's okay now. I kind of just like took a look at what it will look like and I'm happy with it, so I'm just gonna start stitching. I've changed my length back to in between 2 and 3, so it's not at a basting stitch anymore, but I'm just gonna do a straight stitch. There's never enough, babe, so close that you wanted me the way you wanted you, babe. Maybe we wouldn't be too worlds apart, but right here in each other's arms, we almost know. You'll be steady right where you were, and we get the chance we deserve. I'll try to deny it as much as we want, but in time our feelings will show, because sooner or later we'll wonder why we gave up. The truth is everyone knows. Oh, almost is never. So close to being in love. If I would have known that you wanted me the way I wanted you, babe, maybe we would. Oh, still recording. Okay, so I finished that seam now. This is what it looks like. This is the right sides and then this is the back. So we've got the wrong side facing on the inside, but we've still got like this nice back here. I'm just gonna trim away these like little fray bits that came through, you know, like the little threads, because the fabric was fraying so much. Some of them pull out, but just be careful because it might ruin your fabric if you tug on it. I'm just gonna trim them. And oops. And that's fine now. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add my label onto the neck part here. So I'm just gonna separate the yoke and I'm gonna top stitch my label on quickly over here. So now that I've attached my label, we need to do a stay stitch around the yoke area because we need to keep the pieces all the same now because this piece is acting as one. So I'm just gonna pin all around, matching up the shoulders and everything and pinning it. Remember, put as many pins as you need to because satin moves so much. It's actually really irritating how much it moves. But the results are beautiful. I'm just going to pin all around, especially because these bits are on the bias. We really don't want them to like fray out or stretch. So I just gave it a quick iron just to make everything, you know, flat. But I'm just trying not to press into this area too much because it just doesn't look so great. You want that kind of natural, I don't know what you call it, gather puff. I don't know how to explain it. You don't really want to iron the gathers down here. So I'm just gonna like get all the creases out of here. So essentially that's the back complete. On the sample I did a top stitch, but I just think that it would look better without the top stitch on the real fabric, so I'm gonna leave it like that. And now we can work on the front of the fabric. Okay, so now I'm gonna interface the placket. Okay, I think I'm gonna do the interfacing on the closest bit to the body. So I'm just, that's 2.5 that I've already measured out. So I'm just gonna iron that on. So here I'm just ironing the interfacing to one side of the placket. To make it easier, I just lined it up with my pattern, but you may not be able to do this if you've added the placket into the actual paper pattern. By the way, you want to use interfacing that matches the weight of your fabric, so if you're using like a silk or a really soft draping fabric, you want to use lightweight interfacing, or if you're using cotton drill or a denim fabric, you want to use heavyweight interfacing. So I'm using medium weight here for my crepe satin fabric. To form my placket lines, I just folded in my 1cm seam allowance and then folded the fabric to the edge of the interfacing. This is a really finicky step, so you want to do as much prep as you can to sew it up easily and neatly, especially if you're working with a really slippery fabric like me. So I suggest you make sure everything's properly ironed in place so that you know exactly where your folds are supposed to be when you're sewing. And if that isn't enough, definitely use pins. You may find it easy to mark your fabric with a water-soluble marker, but I'm scared of them now because it ruined a shirt I was making recently and I just can't bring myself to use them again. It's just so funny because in my embroidery video I was saying I don't test them on my fabric beforehand, and really I should, and then my words just came back and bit me. But moving on, once I did this for both sides of the placket, I just took it to the sewing machine, lengthened my stitch slightly because I didn't want them too close together, and then I sewed about 1mm away from the folded edge. I'm sewing on the wrong side because I want to make sure my stitches are catching the fold. If you do it like me, just ensure that your bobbin tension's correct, otherwise you'll get some not so pretty looking stitches. You'll get like loops and stuff on the right side. And look at how beautiful the plackets turned out. It's just so satisfying seeing the results of the effort you made. Next I started to mark in my buttonholes. I used a tailor's chalk this time, and at this point is where I decided to lower my neck like I said earlier. So I just dropped it by 1.5cm and smoothed the curve into the neckline. Then I just put the one side on top of the other side of the fabric and cut the other one out so that it's exactly the same. For my buttons, I consider the fact that I'll be putting a necktie on, so I marked the first buttonhole around 1 to 1.5cm down from the neck, and then the rest after that were around 4.5 to 5cm apart. I ended up using roughly 11 to 12 buttons, I think. After that was done, I randomly decided to overlock the shoulder seams instead of starting on the buttonholes, but I think it was a stalling tactic low-key because the buttonholes are just so scary to do. So I just overlocked each shoulder seam separately. I actually planned to do French seams on this garment, but when I received the fabric I realised I can't because it's slightly too thick and wouldn't have allowed the fabric to drape very nicely, so overlocking was my next best option. After that was done, I finally decided it's time to get the buttonholes done. So before I sew any buttonholes onto my actual garment, I always do a sample on some of the scrap fabric because I just can't bear the thought of ruining my piece because of a buttonhole going wrong. So I just mimicked my actual fabric by interfacing it and sewing a placket, and then I just messed around with my machine settings for the buttonhole, finding the ideal width. My machine has an automatic buttonhole feature, so I put the button in the sewing foot and then it calculates the length that the buttonhole needs to be, which is so useful. After that was done, I put the front and back bodies together at the shoulder seams. I pinned them this time as they're on the bias and I want to avoid any stretching. A little tip for good garment production is to snip all the thread along the way unless they're temporarily there like a basting stitch or for gathering. Sometimes having threads everywhere just makes it harder to sew, or it can accidentally get trapped in a seam, just stuff we don't need happening. but after the shoulders were done, I gave them an iron, and now we can move on to the sleeves. So for the sleeves, I started with the cuff and just added some interfacing to the wrong side of them. Something I forgot to mention earlier is that you don't want the interfacing to go into the seam allowance. Not that it's detrimental, but it makes for a nicer finish as the seams won't be stiff and will just lay a bit softer. Another reason is if you're sewing curves that require interfacing like collars, it makes it slightly more difficult to turn the right sides out when they have interfacing in the seam. Okay, so for the cuffs, I just sewed the smaller edge of the cuff to create the width, ironed that seam open, and then folded my cuff in half, matching up and pinning the seams at the top of the cuff. Then I just pressed it in place, which gives a nice crisp cuff edge. Okay, so now we can gather the caps of our sleeves, just like we did the back of the bodice. But to prep, I just gave my fabric an iron to remove any creases before I do my 2 rows of gathering. Then just gently pull on a thread to create some beautiful gathers on the sleeve. Next, I pinned the sleeves to the body. Now at this point you want to make sure you put in the correct sleeve on its corresponding side, so when it's gathered it may be harder to tell which is the front and the back of the sleeve, but to make it more noticeable, just put notches in the sleeve, 2 snips for the back and 1 for the front, then you know where to put each sleeve. So just pin the sleeve around the armhole, making sure the gathers are even. You want majority of them to be focused on the shoulder point, and then just fade them out on both sides. Then just sew them up with a straight stitch. So this is what the sleeves turned out like. They look lovely, but the inside doesn't, so we need to clean it up by trimming off the fraying threads and then overlock it with 1 smooth running stitch. Now it's time to sew the side seams up. In the video, I've already overlocked the edges, so after you overlock the sleeve seam, just overlock the sides of the bodice, and then just start pinning them together. Make sure you match your seams up at the armhole, then just sew carefully with a straight stitch. Another major trick to quality garments is ironing everything. The flatter the seams are, the more professional it looks. So I managed to get a lot done on the first day. I did the placket, the sleeves, assembled the bodice and everything, the buttonholes. So now all that we need to do is gather the bottom of the sleeves and add the cuff on, hem the bottom of the shirt and add the bow tie on, and obviously sew the buttons on by hand. But it's not a lot to do today, to be honest, so I think I can probably get it done in about 2 to 3 hours maybe. But the only thing that might slow me down is the assembling of the bow, because I said I was going to do it a bit differently than I did on the sample, in terms that I'm just going to keep it separated from the neck, but you'll see what I'm talking about. So yeah, I guess now I'm just gonna start to sew up the bow tie. Hey guys, editing Myah again, so you know I've left something out. I forgot to record the hemming and how to attach the cuff to the sleeve. So you just want to gather up the bottom of the sleeve and pin the cuff right sides facing to it, then sew it with a straight stitch and overlock it. And then with the hemming, I used a rolled hem foot, but if you don't have one, you can just fold it once, fold it again, and then do a straight stitch. But that's everything. So to sew the bow on, all I'm doing is taking my bow pieces, which this is the center back, like where it would be at the neck. So I'm just gonna fold in my seam allowance, which is 1 centimeter. Then I'm gonna line it up with the center back and just like kind of measure it around. So I'm measuring it around the neck. And then the point that I want it to stop is like around here. So I'm just doing that. Then I took my tailor's chalk or whatever you're using to mark your fabric and made a little mark. I actually did it on this side. So this mark is going to indicate where I'm going to stop sewing the bow onto the neck of the shirt basically. So you should have 4 pieces of your bow cut if you cut it like me. And then I'm just gonna separate them at the neck area, and then all I gotta do is sew 2 seams here. So once I finished that seam, I just pressed it open and then placed both of the pieces on top of each other, right sides facing, and started to pin along the whole length of the tie. I left the areas open that we marked with our chalk and didn't sew them. Next I just ironed open the seams on the parts of the bow I could get to, and then I started to iron it flat. As you can see, Netflix came out at this point because I knew it would take long. Then I just draped it onto my mannequin to see if I'm happy with it before attaching it to the shirt. At this point, I also pinned through the buttonholes so that I could make exact marks as to where I need to sew my buttons on later. I then overlocked the neck piece and started to pin the centre back collar to the centre back bodice, right sides facing, and continued round until I reached my marks on both sides. Then I took it to my sewing machine and sewed a straight stitch, and this is what it turned out like. So here is where I started to figure out my new plan for a neat finish, and I decided I'm gonna have to fold the inside edge of the tie and do an invisible stitch by hand. But before I did that, I needed to sort out the front of the neck, and to do this I just folded the edge down by 1 centimeter and pinned it in place. I forgot to record this part, but it's a simple enough process. Just be careful though, because this will show on the outside. So then I went ahead and started hand stitching it, which took forever, but I was actually enjoying it, which was really unusual for me because usually the idea of hand stitching is just so daunting, but once you get into it, the flow of it becomes enjoyable. So as you can see, I'm just threading the needle through the seam allowance and looping it through the seam line on the neck, and this just keeps everything secure and straight. After that, I hand stitch the buttons on, making sure I double loop the thread for extra security. And then, as I stated earlier, I forgot to record a few things, and a clip of the hemming would be here, but I forgot. So I just did the rolled hem all along the bottom of the shirt, and then I was completely done. So let's get on to the final reveal. Thank you guys for watching my video. I hope that you enjoyed it and learned something new. If you did learn something new, please give a like, maybe comment, and subscribe. Also share my video to a friend if you think they'll find it useful. Other than that, please follow me on social media. So my Instagram is inspiredbymyah.uk and my TikTok is just inspiredbymyah. But I think that's everything. I don't really want to blabber on too much because the video is really long, so hopefully I'll see you in my next video. Bye guys.